Last time we spoke about the fall of Mandalay. Fierce battles raged over northern Luzon as General Clarkson's forces advanced, capturing key locations, and Colonel Vickman's guerrillas targeted enemy positions. The challenging terrain favored Japanese defenses, creating quite a fierce resistance. But despite this, American troops steadily progressed, securing hills and towns. By mid-March, the 38th Division's relentless push led to significant Japanese losses. The brutal history of POW massacres fueled American resolve, leading to a further victory in the region. American forces led by General Jens Do were given the task of invading Palawan. Despite facing fortified defenses and tough terrain, the 41st Division advanced under artillery and air support. Meanwhile in Burma, British Indian forces clashed with the Japanese, capturing key positions and repelling numerous assaults. As tensions rose in French Indochina, the Japanese executed a coup, disarming French forces and establishing puppet governments. This episode is The Fall of Iwo Jima. Welcome back to the Pacific War Podcast week by week, and I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about World War II? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on World War II, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube, and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Age of Conquest, the Fall and Rise of China podcast. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, or Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. I actually recently unleashed Echoes of War on my YouTube channel. So it'll be premiering there once a week, and it will include visuals. We're going to toss up maps, pictures, and clips to try and help the viewer. Now, if you'd like to further support me, please go check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Today, we are going to be picking up at Iwo Jima. By March the 10th, General Schmidt's Marines had finally breached the determined enemy defenses to reach the northeastern shore of the island. However, there were still Japanese strongholds to eliminate in the central and southern areas. One of these was Cushman's Pocket, named after the commander of the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, and located around a devastated ridge overlooking the sea, which housed a very stubborn resistance southwest of Hill 362C. The other stronghold, held by General Senda's remaining troops, was established on March the 11th, after General Cates initiated his final push southeast towards the sea. Consequently, while Colonel Wessinger's 23rd Marines advanced quickly to the coast, Colonel Linigan's 25th Marines struggled to make headway, as they were quickly halted by intense rocket, motor, and small arms fire from Senda's pocket. Unbeknownst to the Americans, Senda had committed suicide on March the 8th, following the failure of his last Banzai counterattack, leaving the disorganized Japanese forces in the pocket without any leadership. Meanwhile, General Rocky's 5th Marine Division had advanced all the way to General Kuribayashi's last line of defense in northern Iwo Jima, where the battered defenders were preparing to make their final stand. Following a 50-minute preparation involving air, naval, and artillery support on March the 11th, Colonel Liveredge's 28th Marines launched their attack on the left with 3 battalions in the line, while Colonel Warnham's 27th Marines attacked on the right with 4 battalions as well. However, fierce resistance soon forced the combat to close quarters, resulting in the Marines advancing only a few yards, up to 50 yards across the front. Over to the right, while the 21st Marines advanced northwards to connect with the 5th Division, Colonel Kenya's 9th Marines resumed their assaults on Cushman's Pocket. The 1st and 3rd Battalions effectively eliminated all resistance in the eastern sector, completely sealing off the area controlled by the Japanese. On March the 12th, these battalions launched an attack westwards towards Cushman's Pocket, while Colonel Wither's 3rd Battalion served as a holding force on the opposite flank. However, the Marines faced strong opposition and could only advance slowly against the camouflaged enemy positions. To the north, Rocky's units continued to face intense resistance, while Liveredge's made no progress and Warnham achieved only minor advances. An intelligence officer attached to the 5th Division estimated that a minimum of 1,000 Japanese troops were defending the northern end of the island, and he stated, "There is no shortage of manpower, weapons, or ammunition in the area the Japanese have left to defend." The entire northern tip of the island seemed to be honeycombed with caves and passageways. when a 500-pound bomb landed in the mouth of the cave near Kitano Point. A big puff of smoke blew out the side of the cliff over 400 yards away, and another bomb landing in a cave entrance in the same area caused a ring of smoke and dust to come up through the ground for a radius of 200 yards around the point of impact. Meanwhile, to the south, the 25th Marines pressed eastwards, while Colonel Jordan's 3rd Battalion contained the pocket from the north. Supported by tanks, flamethrowers, bazookas, anti-tank grenades, and 30mm mortars, Lanigan's troops engaged in a fierce combat with the heavily fortified Japanese forces in the pocket for over 4 days. During this time, Jordan's 2nd Battalion cleared the beach road, allowing Sherman's to move behind the pocket. On March the 13th, as Wither's 3rd Battalion returned to the 21st Marines, Kenyon's 1st and 3rd Battalions continued their offensive from the east, making significant gains and reducing Cushman's pocket to 250 yards. Meanwhile, following a successful waterborne reconnaissance of Kama and Kogoku rocks the previous afternoon, an armored amphibian company landed on these inlets without encountering any resistance. At the same time, Rocky's weary Marines maintained pressure on the ridge above the gorge, achieving only slight gains on the right. Fortunately, by March 14th, it seemed that the slow, arduous progress of the past 3 days had enabled the 27th Marines to push through the last stronghold of the enemy's positions along the northeastern side of the island. As a result, Liver's Edge was instructed to hold his position while the 26th and 27th Marines advanced north and northwest against lighter opposition, successfully gaining up to 1,000 yards by March 15th. After armored dozers hacked paths forward, tanks were able to lend support. The flame tanks were particularly effective during this phase, and they provided, quote, "the one weapon that caused the Japanese to leave their caves and rock crevices and run." Army planes flew their last air support missions of the operation on the 14th when 5 P-51s dropped firebombs, these being full of gasoline and diesel oil mixture, and they strafed in front of the 3rd Battalion of the 27th from 10:30 to 11. From then on, the narrow confines of the area and operations prevented the use of planes that had performed so well in supporting the ground troops. Artillery and destroyers continued to furnish limited support, firing a preparation for RCT-26 on March 15th and performing night harassing and some illumination missions. Meanwhile, operations against Cushman's pocket entered their final phase on the 14th when Kenyon's 1st and 3rd Battalions finally breached the last enemy defenses by nightfall, and they completed the cleanup of the pocket about 2 days later. On the 15th, Lanigan redirected the main focus of the attack on Sendai's pocket to the south, ordering 2 battalions in the center to engage aggressively, resulting in a gain of approximately 200 yards and a deep penetration into the left flank of the Japanese strongest positions. During the night, enemy forces attempted to infiltrate Marine lines from the south, but each attempt was detected and thwarted. Lanigan launched his final assault on the 16th, facing only a small, isolated amount of pockets of resistance that were quickly eliminated as his battalions advanced towards the beach road. That day, with organized resistance in the 3rd Division's area of operations coming to an end, the 21st Marines were deployed to relieve the 27th Marines on their right flank and to continue northwest to attack. With strong naval and artillery support, Wither's 1st Battalion encountered light resistance in the sector on the right, while the 2nd Battalion faced tougher opposition from scattered enemy positions. Nevertheless, both battalions reached the coastline at Kitano Point by the afternoon, and they began mopping up. Further to the left, Colonel Graham's 26th Marines also advanced cautiously northwest, with tanks effectively neutralizing enemy positions as the Marines gained another 400 yards. Despite the presence of 500 determined enemy troops still resisting in the western section of Kitano Point, and the draw to the southwest, Iwo Jima was officially declared secured by the end of the day. However, on the 17th, the battle for the gorge commenced as the 26th Marines advanced under moderate rifle fire, reaching the northern coast before shifting their focus southwest to confront the gorge in front of the 28th Marines. The gorge in which the last resisting Japanese were now cornered was rocky and steep-sided, approximately 700 yards long and between 200 to 500 yards wide. Rock outcrops cut this ravine into another minor draw that constitute major obstacles to all types of movement. The entire area was ideally suited to the type of last-ditch defense the Japanese had adopted. All routes into the main gorge were swept by heavy and accurate fire from machine guns and rifles concealed in cave positions in the cliffs and outcrops. The plan for attacking this strongpoint called for the 28th Marines, with attached elements of the 5th Pioneer Battalion and Division Reconnaissance Company, to hold the southern rim along the steep cliffs, while the reinforced 26th Marines worked in front to the north and east. For the next 9 days, exhausted Marines carried out this battle of attrition against the thoroughly entrenched enemy. Advances into the east end of the ravine were measured in yards as each cave had to be sealed off before further progress could be maintained. Flamethrower tanks, armored bulldozers, and infantry combined operations provided the power and teamwork necessary to penetrate the last stronghold. As they gradually pushed down the ravine, resistance centered around the large concrete structures built into the knoll near the eastern end. After 2 days of assaults that silenced the supporting positions, engineers used bulldozers to seal a door on the northern side and then demolish the structure with 5 charges totaling nearly 10,000 pounds of explosives. Nevertheless, the battle of attrition persisted, and it wasn't until the end of March 24th that the pocket was reduced to an area of about 50 by 50 yards, and at the northwest end of the draw. The following morning, units of the 28th Marines, which had taken full responsibility for the pocket, reached the coastal cliffs to finally eliminate the last remnants of resistance in the gorge. On the 20th, the 147th Regiment, set to take over the defense of Iwo Jima, arrived from New Caledonia, and by the 24th, they had relieved the 21st Marines to establish night ambushes and patrols. The Japanese defenders fought tenaciously until the very end, choosing death over surrender. However, Kuribayashi had one final assault planned. In the pre-dawn darkness of March 26th, the final act of the tragedy was performed. Between 200 and 300 Japanese troops from Death Valley and other scattered positions on the west coast silently crept through the ravines of the 5th Division sector, heading for a tented area between Airfield No. 2 and the sea occupied a mixture of Seabees, Air Force personnel, shore parties, and AA gunners. Most of them were sleeping, secure in the knowledge that the battle was virtually over, in a coordinated 3-pronged attack against the unsuspecting Marines and Air Force ground crews, aiming to create maximum chaos and destruction. Kuribayashi and his men stealthily cut through the tents, bayoneted sleeping soldiers, and threw hand grenades everywhere, resulting in the deaths of around 44 airmen and 9 Marines. The noise soon alerted troops from the surrounding areas, and Marines from nearby pioneer battalions, African-American troops from a shore party, and soldiers from the 147th Infantry joined into the frenzy of shooting, punching, kicking, and stabbing. Once the initial surprise wore off, the defenders retaliated, engaging in a chaotic hand-to-hand combat until the 5th Pioneer Battalion quickly organized a defensive line and halted the attack. Dawn revealed the full extent of the carnage in the ruined encampment. 44 airmen, 9 Marines lay dead, with a further 119 wounded. Of the attackers, 262 were killed, with 18 captured. Lieutenant Harry Martin of the 5th Pioneers had hurriedly organized a defensive line during the attack, and he single-handedly killed 4 enemy machine gunners before dying himself. He was to be Iwo Jima's final Medal of Honor hero, bringing the total to an incredible 27. The circumstances of General Kuribayashi's death have always been shrouded in a mystery. Over the years, various sources have suggested he died in the fighting around Death Valley, or that he had killed himself at his HQ. According to General Kuribayashi's son, Taro, it seems that it was after sunset on March 25th to the dawn of the 26th that surviving Imperial Japanese forces were obliged to stand still under the U.S. onslaught and the showering of shells. Under such circumstances, he had his sword on his left hand and he ordered his Chief of Staff, Officer Colonel Takahashi, who was beside him, "Send snipers to shoot." Sergeant Oyama heard the order. Oyama, who was seriously wounded in the last combat, fell unconscious and was hospitalized by the U.S. after serving as a POW and came back and testified the dreadful account of the night to me. My father had believed it shameful to have his body discovered by the enemy even after death, so he had previously asked his 2 soldiers to come along with him, one in front of the other behind, with a shovel in hand. In case of his death, he wanted them to bury his body there and then. It seems that my father and the soldiers were killed by shells, and that he was buried at the foot of a tree in Chidora village, along the beach near Osaka Mountain. Afterwards, General Smith spent a whole day looking for his body to pay respect accordingly and perform a burial, but in vain. Following the destruction of this final force, the capture and occupation phase of Iwo Jima had finally been declared complete. Over 34 days of combat, approximately 18,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, and 216 were taken prisoner, while the American side suffered heavy losses as well. 6,821 killed, 19,217 wounded, and 137 tanks were destroyed. On April 4th, the 147th Regiment took over for full responsibility of the ground defenses of Iwo Jima as the Marines were departing the island. Throughout April and May, aggressive patrols and ambushes by infantrymen resulted in an additional 867 prisoners and 1,602 Japanese killed, with the Americans losing another 15 dead and 144 wounded. Meanwhile, General LeMay's 21st Bomber Command continued its firebombing campaign against the Japanese home islands. After the successful Tokyo Great Air Raid, and a less effective attack on Nagoya, LeMay decided to send 301 B-29s on the afternoon of March the 13th to strike Osaka. Despite having to use radar bombing due to cloud cover, American bombardiers achieved a denser and more uniform bombing pattern than the impressionistic methods employed in Nagoya. This resulted in the destruction of 8.1 square miles of the city's core, including commercial and industrial areas, and it caused 13,129 civilian casualties, with the loss of 2 bombers and 13 others damaged. Keeping up the intensity of the firebombing campaign, LeMay dispatched 307 B-29s to attack Kobe on the night of March 16th. They faced 314 enemy interceptors, which proved ineffective against the superfortress unleashing fire over the port. Consequently, the fire on March 17th spiraled completely out of control, obliterating the eastern half of the business district and devastating a significant industrial zone to the southeast, including the Kawasaki shipyards. Japanese statistics would show the destruction was appalling. About 500 industrial buildings were destroyed, 162 were damaged. The loss of 65,951 houses left over 250,000 people homeless. The police reported 2,669 deaths and about 11,289 injured. Although the destruction was devastating for the Japanese, LeMay was disheartened to find that only 2.9 square miles of the city had burned. To complete his campaign, LeMay sent 313 bombers back to Nagoya on the night of the 19th, utilizing radar techniques to cover a large portion of the city. This resulted in the burning of 3 square miles, including Nagoya's arsenal, freight yards, and Aichi's engine works. With an average of 380 aircraft, the 21st Bomber Command conducted 1,595 sorties over 10 days, dropping a total of nearly 10,000 tons of bombs. The results far exceeded expectations, as the B-29s left a trail of absolute destruction across 4 major cities, decimating 32 square miles and destroying numerous critical targets. Thus, LeMay's strategy proved very successful, leading to incendiary area bombing becoming the standard practice of the future. But now I want to shift our focus from the Central Pacific to the South Pacific, where we need to address some ongoing actions the Australians were taking in New Britain. Following the capture of Milam and Ea in January, General Ramsay's 5th Division aimed to continue its limited advances to the north. To secure crossings over the Ip River and to patrol towards Henry's Reed Bay, the entire 6th Brigade began moving to Kip Milam's area on January the 26th, completing this relocation by February the 11th. Concurrently, the 14th and 32nd Battalion had advanced beyond Ip and was conducting patrols towards Calais Plantation, where they faced some enemy resistance. The 36th Battalion also moved forward to Malevo Plantation, leading to retaliatory actions against the new Australian outpost at Bay. In response, Ramsay dispatched stronger patrols to the Sai River throughout February, successfully establishing a new defensive line along the Mavella River by the month's end. Returning to the White Bay after a series of aggressive patrols and nighttime ambushes, the 14th and 32nd Battalion managed to reach Kamadran Mission by mid-February. The Australians continued to advance, and by the end of the month, the 19th Battalion, which had replaced the 14th and 32nd at Gabulu Creek, secured crossings over the Mavella River and patrolled east towards the Wolwot River. On March the 3rd, Ramsay ordered the 6th Brigade to cross the Wolwot and capture the Watavalo Ridge. 2 days later, the 19th Battalion initiated the assault, but struggled to push more than one company across the river due to fierce enemy resistance. On March the 6th, following an artillery bombardment, another company successfully crossed and secured Cake Hill. The next day, Lone Tree Hill was taken following another round of artillery bombardment. On March the 10th, Moose Hill, Youngs Hill, and Perry's Knoll had all been captured. The following days, Australian artillery began to suppress enemy motors as infantry moved towards Cath's Hill. By mid-March, the 14th and 32nd Battalion replaced the 19th Battalion, and on the 16th, the Australians resumed their offensive, facing fierce resistance, but successfully encircling Bacon Hill. The assault continued the next day, as the 14th and 32nd fought to reach the summit of the hill. On the 18th, motor fire was intensified from the few remaining enemy positions, and it seemed that the Japanese were firing off their ammunition while they still could. The attack was resumed. When Corporal Marin's section was halted on a steep spur by fire from 3 posts, he jumped up shouting, "They can't do that to me." He then went on alone, firing at post, killing 5 before he himself was hit. The decisive attack was launched throughout this foothold. By 3 p.m., all the Japanese had been cleared out from Bacon Hill, and a patrol from Cath's under Lieutenant Lamshed penetrated a knoll about 800 yards to the east and found no enemy there. Now no Japanese remained at the Watavalo Toll area. Within the 5 days from the 16th to the 20th, 4 officers and 53 others were killed or wounded. In the following days, patrols ventured deep in enemy territory but found few stragglers. On the 21st, the 19th Battalion took over again and advanced towards Bulos and Nindab River. On the 28th, Ramsey ordered the 13th Brigade to relieve the 6th Brigade, as a transition was completed by April the 12th. Following the capture of Watovala Ridge, there were 4 months of infantry patrolling and routine maintenance by the other troops, with the 16th Battalion patrolling forward to Jamur Bay in the area. Additionally, looking further west, a company from the 36th Battalion successfully landed north of Sai on March 30th, but could not proceed to Matalali River due to heavy rains. However, Japanese positions there were heavily bombarded by aircraft and the sloop Swan, prompting the defenders to withdraw to the Tori River in April. Meanwhile, Brigadier King's 16th Brigade advanced to the Nanawa River by March 12th, while Brigadier Mohn's 17th Brigade continued west to push through the Torchikeli Mountains, aiming to capture the Japanese base at Maprik. Throughout March, the 2 and 7th Battalion executed several successful ambushes from their new bases at Iliahap, Balangabatabil, and Bobita, while Hay Force advanced through Sinoa to the north of Udumugu and eastwards to Tanimba. By early March, Mohn had cleverly led the enemy to believe that their primary offensive would be launched by the 2 and 10th Commando Squadron from the north via Ami. As a result, the Japanese bolstered their forces in that area, successfully driving back the Australian patrols from Chalak, Guaninigan, and Wambak. On March 13th, the commando outpost at Milak came under attack, with the Japanese gradually encircling the position in the following days, but failing to overcome the defenders' steadfast resistance. Fortunately, by the 17th, patrols had restored communication lines, and 2 days later, the enemy pressure finally subsided. During this time, smaller Japanese forces also targeted the commando outposts at Merak and Opik, but the defenders managed to repel these attacks as well. However, as the 2 and 10th were now completely exhausted, the 2 and 6th Battalion were dispatched to relieve the commandos in late March, amidst a new wave of Japanese assaults. Meanwhile, the 2 and 7th Battalion was engaged in assaults on the fortified enemy positions at Ilaheda, which fell on March 20th. The Australians then turned their attention to Opik villages, successfully focusing their efforts on the west bank of the Nindab River by the end of March. This coincided with Hay Force's crossing of the Amuk River. In the following 3 days, the 2 and 7th Battalion cleared all positions along the eastern side of the Nindab River in preparation for the final push towards Maprik. Consequently, General Miyake's 78th Regiment was ultimately compelled to retreat towards Jamai. Looking further north, King decided to initiate his advance towards, but by mid-March, a company from the 2 and 2nd Battalion had crossed the Ninawa on March 14th and quickly moved through Bai and Oltan. Although the Australian advance faced strong enemy positions that delayed progress for over 2 days, the 2 and 2nd ultimately broke through Minab Creek, catching the defenders off guard, and swiftly captured Butt Airfield on March 17th. Following this, the Australians patrolled the foothills and the old German road leading towards Degao Airfield, encountering minimal resistance. Consequently, on the 21st, the 2 and 2nd advanced rapidly after successfully taking Degao, while the 2 and 1st Battalion moved on to secure Butt. At this point, Japanese resistance along the coast was quite light, as General Adachi had focused on the Maprik district, which could notably produce more food. With the main enemy forces now concentrated in the hills to the south, King directed the 2 and 2nd to clear the foothills south of Dugai to eliminate the enemy in the Tokoku Pass, while the 2 and 3rd Battalion launched a flanking attack at the Mambam River, Hamsuk, Yalamanuni area. The 2 and 2nd then patrolled deep towards Magahen and Wanganara Mission, facing strong resistance at the 1410 feature. On the 24th, they finally captured the feature, with another patrol reaching Wanganara without encountering any enemy forces. However, in the final days of March, the Australians struggled to advance against strong enemy resistance around the Wanganara track, although one patrol successfully probed towards Carmarak Hill. On April the 2nd, following intense air and artillery bombardments, the 2 and 2nd Battalion finally managed to break through the Tokoku Pass, which was now secured. Meanwhile, another patrol advanced south from Dagwa to the Otogi Waladum area, and then to the coast near Kofi. The 2 and 3rd Battalion moved south from Feature 1410 towards the Mabam River and the Wanganara Mission, successfully eliminating a series of Japanese ridge positions by April the 6th. The 2 and 1st Battalion patrolled deep into the hills south and west of Butt, completely encircling the area by April the 1st, while also pushing eastwards to capture Saburaman. Concurrently, the 2 and 3rd Machine Gun Battalion advanced to the upper Ninua, effectively clearing the region from the north-south line about 2 miles beyond Muguwulua by the end of March. In early April, the machine gunners successfully cleared the Marambas area, and then they connected with the 201st Battalion. And now I want to shift our focus over to Bougainville to continue covering the Australian offensives on that island. Last time we were here, Brigadier Stevenson's 11th Brigade had secured the Tsimba Ridge area, while Brigadier Field's 7th Brigade had advanced south towards the Paretta River. The swift capture of Mozengata and the unexpected secondary landing at Toko had already compelled the Japanese to retreat behind the river amidst a complete command crisis. The Japanese policy of resisting the southward advance more strongly, even if it entailed heavier casualties, failed to impose the hoped-for delay of the Australians. Nevertheless, the Japanese leaders considered that the 13th Regiment's swift, damaging hit-and-run tactics were well executed. However, Mozengata was at a length abandoned, and the withdrawal south of Paretta ordered. The landing at Toko was unexpected, and it caused an acceleration of their withdrawal. There now occurred a major crisis in the Japanese command. The young reserve officers were highly critical of the conduct of the campaign, and they blamed the policies of the older professional officers for the constant reverses. This criticism became so outspoken that in February, a number of young officers were relieved of their commands. Perhaps partly as an outcome of this crisis, General Hyakutake suffered a paralysis of his left side. General Kanda took command of the 17th Army, and Lieutenant General Akinada Tsutsitomo, the Chief of Staff of the Army, succeeded him in command of the 6th Division. As recalled by a young officer, "This change of command was regarded favorably by the young officers, but it soon became apparent that Kanda intended to pursue the exact same policy as Hyakutake. Kanda was a shrewd, hard, fussy little professional soldier of long experience. He was steeped in tradition and a ruthless commander, but even his bitterest critics admitted his capabilities. Akinaga was a dyed-in wool materialist and a strict disciplinarian. Unused to an active command, he was plunged into a situation which was a little out of his depth. One of his staff stated that he spent too much time doing a corporal's job in his 4 battalions to be a good divisional commander." By late February, General Bridgefort's forces advanced towards Paretta, facing only minor rearguard positions. The 25th Battalion captured Barara on February the 22nd and a 5-acre garden 2 days later, while the 61st Battalion took control of another garden measuring 600 by 400 yards near the river on March the 1st. Meanwhile, the 218th Commando Squadron was sent to secure the Macapika area, successfully taking Commando Ridge and fording across the Macapika River by the 5th. With General Savage aiming to reach the Hari River next, Bridgeford promptly ordered the 7th Brigade to move to the Hungarai River line. As a result, Field planned to initiate his main advance on the 11th, utilizing the 25th Battalion and the 218th Commando Squadron, while the 61st Battalion pushed forward towards Horanu. In response, Kanda dispatched the 23rd Regiment to bolster the 13th at the front, preparing both units for a full-scale counterattack should the Australians cross the Paretta, aiming to delay the enemy long enough to finalize preparations for a decisive battle along the Silabai-Parora rivers. By March the 5th, the 25th Battalion had already crossed the river and swiftly captured Slater's Knoll, which soon came under enemy mortar fire. Patrols were sent ahead, and they found that the 13th Regiment was poised to fiercely contest the Australian advance. Although the northern flank of the 25th Battalion would effectively be contained along the Buin Road, on March the 11th, 2 Australian companies managed to maneuver through Tokinoto to the south, reaching Huri by the end of the day. One of these companies moved along the eastern side of the Buin Road towards Slater's Knoll, but from March the 15th to the 17th, they faced a heavy counterattack that ultimately forced them to withdraw. In response, Field initiated a strong offensive along the Buin Road on the 19th, managing to push the Japanese back to some rear positions. Following a significant air and artillery bombardment, the attack resumed on the 22nd, successfully overcoming all enemy resistance. Meanwhile, the commandos advanced to Nihiro, where they began extensive patrols southwards towards Unanai, Hari, and the Buin Road. During one of these patrols, they captured detailed orders for a large-scale Japanese offensive planned for early April. As a result, Bridgeford decided to pause his offensive, and he sent the 15th Brigade, along with the tank squadron, to Toko to reinforce his perimeter. On the 28th and 29th, before Akinaga's main assault, the Japanese conducted a series of raids on the Australian lines of communication and the rear areas, all of which were successfully repelled by vigilant defenders. On the 30th, the 13th Regiment launched several strong attacks against the 25th Battalion, all of which were costly for the attackers and repelled, while the armored squadron advanced towards Tokinodu. Just as the tanks reached the front, the Japanese initiated another wave of fierce attacks against the 25th Battalion on March 31st, which were thankfully repelled with the support of armored units. Consequently, on April 1st, two companies advanced again, establishing a perimeter 1,000 yards south of Slater's Knoll. That evening, and for the following 3 days, Okinawa launched a series of raids to facilitate the arrival of the 23rd Regiment for a renewed assault. Until 6:20 a.m., wave after wave charged forward and was brought low. Some Japanese fell within 4 yards of the weapon pits. The artillery sent over accurate defensive fire, registered the previous day. At dawn, the surviving Japanese were heard digging on some dead ground. As the light became clearer, the Australians saw that, quote, enemy dead lay literally in heaps in front of the wire, and the bodies could be seen scattered over an area 200 yards square. It was gruesome evidence of the efficient sitting of weapons of choice of fields of fire in preparation for the expected attack. The attackers were ordered to dig in until darkness and make full use of grenades and mortars. However, in the afternoon, tanks and artillery fire drove the Japanese from these positions that they had once gained, and the Japanese commander accepted complete defeat. All 3 battalion commanders in the 13th were killed. After Okinawa had reported his failure, Kanda said to his chief of staff, Colonel Yoshiyuki Ijima, "It would not have happened if I had been in command. The enemy right flank was wide open. I would have severed his lifeline and controlled Toko. We could have delayed the enemy for 3 months." Concurrently, around 100 Japanese troops attacked the 2 forward companies along the Boone Road, but they were similarly repelled with ease. Following the unsuccessful counteroffensive by Okinawa, Slater's Knoll received reinforcements while the remaining Japanese forces were being dealt with, resulting in 620 Japanese fatalities by March 28th, compared to 189 Australian casualties. However, Bridgeford could not capitalize on this victory due to his prolonged supply line, which temporarily halted his offensive. As a result, while the 2 and 8th Commando Squadron moved forward along the Commando Road, the 13th Brigade began to relieve the battered 7th Brigade under Field on April 13th. Meanwhile, in the northern sector of the 11th Brigade area, the 26th Battalion launched a significant advance northwards on February 21st, successfully overrunning the Lalum Downs Ridge area by March 8th. 2 companies then advanced further north to secure the crossing of the Nindab River. On the 13th, another company landed near the southern edge of Sorokan Plantation, and they quickly pushed the enemy back behind the Nagam. Australian patrols harassed the Japanese forces at Horseshoe Knoll until March 20th, when they finally withdrew. Simultaneously, the 26th Battalion eliminated the remaining enemy positions at the Compton River. They secured the Sorokan Peninsula, while the Taof and Saposa Islands were also captured off the coast. The next battalion to take over the forward positions was the 31st 51st Battalion. Perhaps the outstanding patrol leader in the 31st 51st was Lieutenant Reeder, who led 3 patrols which killed 10 out of 78 Japanese killed by the battalion's forays. One of these patrols was named by the battalion the Raid on Reeder's Ridge. Reeder and 15 men were given the task of harassing the Japanese occupying a prominent ridge just east of Sisivi, and they discovered their strength. They departed from Keenan's Ridge at about 5:30 on the 27th of March, bivouacked at a former artillery observation post, and then they moved at 3 a.m. the next morning for a dawn attack. At 6 a.m., this is what they faced. The patrol moved in, and the throwing of grenades and firing of LMG occupied a small knoll. 2 Japanese were killed, 1 pillbox containing LMG destroyed. Patrol raced down narrow neck to a wide clearing in which several huts were sighted. Phosphorus and high explosive grenades were thrown. In a matter of seconds, 4 more Japanese killed, 2 in the slit trenches, 1 as he ran, and another was ablated. 2 were wounded by phosphorus grenades. 3 huts were blazing, and 1, considered to be an ammunition dump, blew up. Enemy opened up with 1 LMG and 15 rifles, and a patrol pulled out with 1 man wounded. Instead of hastening them away, Reeder assembled his men nearby in concealment and he watched the enemy. At length, the Japanese began to move out again, and soon they were washing their clothes, chopping wood, and performing other tasks. There were about 25 to 30 enemy at this post. The Australians were watchful throughout the morning. At about 12:30, they opened fire with all their weapons. 2 Japanese were killed and 4 enemy huts were set on fire. The enemy fired back, and by 1:15, Reeder withdrew his men and he returned to Keenan's Ridge, leaving an ambush on the enemy's track. The ambush party returned later and reported that they had no movement. On the 29th, the day after Reeder's return, a platoon of the 1st New Guinea Infantry Battalion under Lieutenant Martin set out for Buritzio Torora along the Wukani River. There they found 3 huts and a large garden with 7 Japanese moving around unarmed. Throwing grenades and firing from the hip, the native soldiers attacked and killed all 7. 3 more who emerged from a hut were chased and killed. 3 of the dead men were found to be lieutenants. 3 machine guns were captured as well. The next day at Avang, 1,200 yards away, 7 more Japanese were seen, and of them, 3 including another lieutenant were killed and others fled. I'd like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at The Age of Conquest, the Fall and Rise of China podcast, written and narrated by me. And after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on all major podcast platforms. Me and my co-host Garo have decided that we're bringing Echoes of War onto the YouTube channel over the Pacific War channel, so the first episode titled, What is Echoes of War, just premiered. Please go check it out. Also, if you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/pacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. The battle for Iwo Jima had come to a bitter end. The lessons learned at Iwo Jima would become guidelines for the future Battle of Okinawa that will come about in April, and it would influence Allied plans for the invasion of the Japanese home islands. The war planners would later notably take into account that around a third of their troops committed on Iwo Jima, and later again on Okinawa, had been killed or wounded, and that they could expect far more on the Japanese home islands.